Pamela Young, and this is Thrive 2030. I have with me today Molly Matthews, who's the Chief Executive of Pushpay, which is a company listed on the New Zealand and Australian stock exchanges. And Pushpay, if you haven't heard of it, is a mobile giving service, and it was established around about 2010. Is that correct, Molly?
Yes, 2011 to be exact.
2011 to be exact. Established 2011, listed on the stock exchange. The business has expanded from New Zealand and Australia up to the US and Canada. And I'd like to welcome Molly, who is the relatively new Chief Executive. Welcome, Molly. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Pamela.
Oh, you're welcome. It's terrific to have an opportunity to talk with you. This business is a very interesting and, for me, quite exciting, because the learning about your business has been something special. And what I'd like to do today is explore with you, how did Pushpay, what was the effect of the pandemic on you and your people, your employees and your customers? And also, how are you going to pivot in order to make the changes you need to do to survive to 2030. As a technology business, I understand you have got those nimble skills in your business, which most tech companies have, but I'd like to talk today a little bit about the journey from early 2020 and how it affected the businesses customers down under, which I think might be a little different from the customers that you have in the US and Canada. So Molly, if we could just start with a little bit of context about Pushpay. I understand you have the mobile giving service, but probably 12 to 18 months ago, you acquired another business which added on engagement capability to support the development, engagement and communication of the members of the churches and charities and schools who are your customer group. Is that correct?
That's true. Yes. Yeah. So in December of 2019, we acquired Church Community Builder, which is a wonderful software company that does just what you mentioned. It provides an opportunity for churches or non-for-profit organizations to really track and nurture and grow those community members throughout time.
Yes, and that's a terrific addition to the original service, which was a mobile app to provide opportunity for people to make their contributions and donations to church communities and to support church projects via, an app service.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we started in Auckland, really wanting to just change the way in which people could donate to their local church or charity. It was so easy to purchase a song on iTunes or to buy a cup of coffee in a cafe, but you really had to come prepared to be generous if you were attending church or wanted to, give to a charitable organization. So that's really how we started. And we, over time, developed not just that kind of transaction donation platform, but it really became a true donor management solution that helped to provide insights and understanding and really nurture a donor, ensure that they're thanked for their generosity by that organization. And we also added a custom application along our journey, and that is really a content beacon. So instead of somebody having to log into a computer to engage with their community, they're able to use their mobile phone with an app that we're all accustomed to. But those apps are designed and built and produced by churches, and it really wraps content around that moment of generosity and so many other opportunities for them to engage with their community.
Fantastic. When the business was started back in New Zealand and listed on the stock exchange in New Zealand, then Australia, at what point in time did it move to North America, Canada and the US?
Yeah, so interestingly, we were already operating in the US when we listed, and that really came down to our total addressable market. So if churches were going to be our primary target market, the most churches kind of are in, especially in that evangelical space, are actually in the United States. And so our co-founders moved their families from Auckland all the way across to, I'm here today just outside of Seattle, Washington. And really began to found our company here and create a presence in the United States.
Well, on that note, I might just join you in Seattle, Washington, just to show folks what it looks like.
I know, that's so beautiful. It looks like that today. Sunny and gorgeous.
It's a really beautiful harbour, so
Yeah.
let's take advantage of a moment of wallowing in your beautiful sunshine. So why did they choose Seattle, the United States? We'll get onto the pandemic in a minute, but I just want to provide context to your business.
Yeah, so, Seattle is home to some absolute tech giants who built wonderful reputations of hiring and developing talent here. So think of Microsoft and Amazon. And so they really came here out of a desire to hire world-class talent when it came to growing a financial technology business. And that's why they landed in Redmond. So Redmond is just to the east of Seattle, and it's also where the headquarters of Microsoft is.
Okay, and it looks like a beautiful place to work.
It's lovely.
Just turning ourselves to the early 2020, you were still in your Chief Customer Officer role at that time. You've been with the company since 2016, so you'd already been there for 4+ years. Can you just share with us what moment, where were you at the moment that you heard that there was a pandemic, and what was the immediate reaction, conversation, and thoughts of your top team at that time?
Yes, so I actually was on a bit of a holiday with my husband, and we were in Canada, and we were a little nervous that we weren't going to be able to get back into the country. And so we, hustled home and kind of ended that a bit early, was able to rally our team together, have really thoughtful conversations. And, if you remember back outside of the cruise ship where that outbreak really started, the place in the United States where the outbreak started was here in the Seattle area. So just a stone's throw from our office. And so we really pivoted rather quickly to a fully work from home environment. People were in the office on a Thursday afternoon and, woke up the next morning to an email that said, please don't come into the office.
Wow.
Yes. And so I'm so grateful. We have incredible operations leaders at our office and throughout our company in all 3 locations. And they really had equipped us early to be ready for that pivot to remote. And so I think we were a bit ahead of the curve in that sense. In Seattle.
How was that? Could you describe when you say they had prepared you?
Yeah, so in Seattle, beautiful, as you can see in the photo behind you. But if it happens to snow here, the whole city shuts down. Because it's so rare and it's just not equipped. And so the last few years we've had, a snowstorm that might last 2 or 3 days, but it's kind of made it really difficult for people to actually get to our office. And so we had kind of gone through a plan earlier that year to equip everyone to be able to pivot to remote work. And actually in February, we did that. We did that pivot because of a snowstorm. So we kind of got to test it out. And then sure enough, the very beginning of March of 2020, we were able to send everybody home with the equipment that they needed. And we actually had several of our leaders kind of driving different equipment pieces around to those who needed something extra in the weeks that came. And we were, ready to kind of set up that following Monday and be back to work as usual.
Okay, so that was fortunate that you had those possible impending disasters that you had already planned for, which made it easier for you to say, well, we're ready to cater for this. What about down under? How did the New Zealand and Australian markets cope with the immediate changes that were?
Yeah, it was a little bit different timeline for all 3 of our locations. So we have an office in downtown Auckland, we have an office in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and one here in Redmond, Washington. And the Redmond office shut down really immediately, followed by the Colorado Springs office and then the Auckland office. So in some ways, they had a little bit of a tip of the hat of, hey, this might be coming, and could spend a few days equipping the staff members in that office to be able to pivot to fully remote. As you know, the Auckland community really recovered quite a bit faster than the United States. So our Auckland team has been kind of in and out of the office for quite some time. We're here in the Seattle area. We are just thinking about heading back into the office formally in late summer and into the fall.
Yes. So that's your internal response. If we could just turn our mind now to your customers, which would be your churches and schools and the charities who use this app for their giving of their contributions and donations. How did this impact your business? When we all went into lockdown, we weren't allowed to go to church or school,
Yes.
so or attend our charity meetings. So how did that lack of attendance affect your business?
Yes, hugely impactful for our customer base. They went from holding all of their gatherings in person in one building with no concept of social distancing to having to pivot almost immediately to a fully digital environment. And so we felt so blessed through that season that we had a solution that could help our churches. So our existing customers really were able to dig in and leverage application to communicate and have community within this new digital environment. And some of our other larger churches, they already were streaming, so sending a video feed out, much like a kind of television program or a YouTube channel is used really frequently to be able to share that message, but they were doing that through the app. And it was really a wonderful way for people to stay connected in such a scary, unknown time. And then the other thing that we really saw is because we do have a digital payments or a digital donation side of our business, digital payments just went through the roof for anyone who's in that space because people, and this is what I think is just so amazing about culture, is people were so generous through that season. They knew that charities, schools, and churches were going to be hurting. And so you really saw not just the existing level of donation coming through, but we really saw people just being more and more generous to their communities, churches, and organizations they support.
Well, that's a really good outcome. That is terrific to hear. Yeah. Your relationship between your people and your customers, can you just describe how that might have altered and what you had to do to cater for any change there?
Yeah, we had a huge influx of new customers come in kind of March and the beginning of April as churches were having to pivot to be able to accept donations digitally or have an application or some way to connect. And so our sales team, our implementation teams, our customer success organization, they were absolutely just inspiring is the word I would use through that time. They were all working from home and just leaned into the process because, I think in a time of crisis, whatever that crisis might be, we all do desire to be helpful. Yeah. We desire to be a part of the solution, right? Yeah. And so for our staff members, it was such a clear connection. The work that we were doing so clearly was making a positive impact in the midst of this crisis. And so impressed by our teams, lots and lots of extra hours worked, lots of hard conversations with customers, just, trying to support them and help them get things kind of up and running. Lots of fear here in the United States through that season. I'm sure elsewhere, but obviously that's where I am. So really a lot of fear of what is coming next. And they were just, I would say pseudo implementation customer success / a little, kind of heart-to-heart counselors through that season.
Yes, now it was a very difficult time for the US most of last year. So if we could just focus in on that particular market for a moment, to just get a sense of how different it was from Canada, Australia, or New Zealand, because of the turmoil that you have been going through with political challenges and social challenges and economic challenges. Did you see a major difference between the markets?
I think we did. We saw some difference in behavior, both from a consumer standpoint, but also just for our internal teams. Last year, the entirety of 2020 was consumed with truly kind of negative media, and whether it was rightful or put through the wrong lens, the reality is we were just absolutely inundated with heavy topics. And I think in one hand,
do you mean Pushpay, or do you mean the industry, or do you mean the nation?
Just the nation. I would say the nation. Yes. So again, from a Pushpay standpoint, we were very lucky that we have a product that thrived through this season, where so many other businesses, cafes, restaurants, dry cleaners, I could continue down the list. They were so negatively impacted and still haven't recovered here in our area, to be truthful. where we, from a business perspective, really were able to sustain and continue to be really effective through that period of time, which is amazing. And that does not go unnoticed by our team or our board of directors.
Yeah.
But for our people, at the end of the day, the staff that work for us are human beings. They're not just Pushpay staffers. So they were also really feeling the pressures, whether they be in Auckland, Colorado, across the US, or here in Redmond, just the weight really that was happening here in the States. And that was definitely a tricky time for our staff members.
Okay, what were the major business risks when you sat around with your top 10, the executive team? What were the 2 or 3 key things that you were worried about? Were they financial, operational, customer communications? I mean, what were the things that you were most worried about? Put your energy into?
Yeah, I would say, we weren't necessarily worried from a financial impact in the beginning. We're very, very blessed. We have a very well-run business that has been profitable. We definitely were curious about what the future looked like. So from a forecasting perspective, right? It's one thing to be content in the season or feel safe in the season, but there's this risk that your forecasting might change, or for us, digital adoption rates would change, or people would make pivots. We also were concerned that our customer base would decline. So some churches were able to, carry on and carry through the season, and others were not. And so we were seeing smaller churches across the United States closing down because they weren't able to kind of come up to speed from a technology standpoint. And so we were worried, is that going to impact us, like from a future sales perspective? I think operationally, our team was well equipped, but as the weeks turned into months that turned into an entire year, you do start to think through, is our tooling and our tech stack really efficient and equipped to help us be in this full remote environment over a long period of time? And thankfully, we have a really talented team that was able to innovate and improvise throughout the year, but it definitely was a risk factor that we had to weigh.
Down under, we've been fortunate in both Australia and New Zealand that we have got past our lockdowns more quickly because we were able to shut borders. And of course, we didn't have the proximity that you have to the Northern Hemisphere. So we have the benefit of having come out of lockdown earlier. We've had to go back in and out a few times, and some states in Australia have had more lockdowns than others. So, but on the whole, we've had an easier time than you have in the United States. How has that impacted your people and your morale and your culture and your ability to lead and motivate people?
Yeah, I would be not truthful if I didn't say that this was a difficult season, because we had such a strong in-office culture. We really, enjoy being around one another. We have, a tremendous amount of different cultural items and activities are really centered around our office space and us gathering together to do those, whether it be to share information or, just celebrations, or just those little things that are just a part of the ethos of who you are as a company. And so, the first several months, I think, again, people were just rolling their sleeves up, and, it was new.
Yeah.
But then, goodness, when month 4 turned into month 5 and 6, you could really see it just taxing some of the folks on our team. And, I think it's really important as a leader to remember that people are in different stages of life. Not everyone's living in a home that has a space to office. Some people have roommates. People have children at home.
Yes,
people have partners
elderly,
that they're working in the same space. Yeah, all of those things that are very real. And so we really felt like we needed to begin to acknowledge that. And we also found something that was interesting, where people were actually working more than the standard 8 hours because they kind of ran out of other things to do, right? And you're not commuting and you're not going out. Yeah, you're not going, well, except for then it starts to drain, I think, a little bit on the morale of your team. And so no one was taking vacations. Like no one took a holiday. And so we really had to push people to disconnect. And we did that as a leadership team. Yes. And it's funny, you would think, who needs to be pushed to take a break? But there just weren't as many things. There was no travel open. but we still felt it was really valuable and needed and necessary for people to disconnect from work
It does
and really take a break.
Yeah, it does take quite a bit of adjustment if you don't have a home office to create an environment that is quiet, motivating, not too distracting. I mean, I've always had a home office, for, as well as a city office. I've had the luxury of having both worlds. But for most people, 99.9% of the people, they go to their workplace. And to all of a sudden to be told that you've got to sit somewhere in your home with your laptop and communicate with the team on Zoom and do your normal work. You can manage that for a little bit, like you might do on a holiday, but to make it a permanent situation, and as you say, get the room set up, get your technology set up, get a good chair that you're not going to end up with back injury or hip problems, all of these things. And as you say, some people live alone, some people have flatmates, some people live with extended families, and trying to focus on work with all those distractions can be okay for a short period of time, but over the long stretch, it does have a toll. And there has been an increase in mental health generally. And I've talked to a number of institutions that run programs, and they've all said that they've had an increase in mental health, drug and alcohol abuse issues, not abuse, beg your pardon, addictions. It's no wonder, because we're constrained. So can you just share any, programs or methods by which you manage to keep people focused, to support them, or other than, allowing them time off or insisting that they take a break? But how did you, as a leader of people and managers of teams, what sort of techniques did you employ to keep people feeling engaged and supported?
Yeah, one of the things that we recognized, kind of, again, I think the tricky part in the States, and I wouldn't say this was altogether different than Auckland, was you kind of didn't know when it was going to end. And so you were hopeful for a season, just maybe a few more weeks, a few more months. And then suddenly you kind of recognize it's August and this started in March. And so we wanted to resource our team. So we gave a stipend to anyone who worked for us to be able to equip themselves better internet, a different chair, a desk, a light, whatever you need, you get it. We opened our office up in an appropriate way for the time to allow people one at a time to come in and grab things. If they wanted to take a chair from our office home, in Redmond, we are in a place where it's easy for them to do that. And so they were able to go in and grab a few things to kind of get themselves set up to be successful at home. And the other thing, which I think, all of those items I listed are important, and it's equipping them to be successful. But when it comes to mental health, the thing that we really leaned into was creating those moments for connection that didn't have anything to do with work. When you walk into an office, you might catch up with someone in the elevator, you're grabbing a cup of coffee together, you walk to lunch, you ask how someone's weekend was or what they're heading out to do, on a Friday evening. Exactly. And those moments really died in this quick pivot to remote work. It was all work all the time. And so really creating those opportunities. Yes,
for short, snappy get-togethers that replicated that sort of sense of, let's stand at the sink in the kitchen and have a little chin wag.
Right.
That's great. I think also perhaps when we spoke the other day, we were talking a little bit about the culture of tech companies, because when you move from having an in-office environment to a stay-at-home environment, you lose that ability, as you say, to connect with people. So you lose that ability to demonstrate values, to demonstrate leadership, to demonstrate your team behaviours. Makes it quite difficult. So there is a big challenge for the organisation's culture and how we address that. So one of the things that you mentioned the other day was tech culture is different because you're used to operating through technology. You're nimble, your industry changes a lot, your software changes, opportunities come and go quite frequently. So you're used to these sort of more turbulent environments than, say, an insurance company that's been around for 300 years or something like that. It's quite a different environment. Can you pinpoint what it is about the tech culture? What are the things that lie beneath the values and the attitudes that enable you to be so good at pivoting and being nimble.
Yeah, the word that comes to mind, and you mentioned this a bit earlier, is agile. I think that you step into this industry because you desire to be a part of something that's changing and moving and new and innovative. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, you really have to have a level of openness to change or agility. And I think that is something that's really a common thread I see throughout people who work for us. And we have folks who are very missionally aligned, right? They love what we do, and that's really important. But they also desire to innovate on behalf of our customer base. And that innovation, I think, really inspires you to be willing and kind of open to, if not, dare I say, expect change to take place pretty frequently. Because if it's not changing in technology, it's dying, right? Like there's just no, you and I were, catching up about the different video solutions there are for meetings today. And you kind of might want to make a switch, but what you're really looking for is which of those providers is bringing the newest, greatest thing to you and your team.
That's right. Yeah, that's a really good point. That your industry attracts people who like that constant change, innovation, and so forth. What challenges does that bring to you as a leader? I mean, there's always a flip side.
There is. Yeah. There is always a flip side. And I would say, we have had to really kind of understand this flip side of this, which is people need to be challenged, and they need to feel like the product they're working on, the solution they're solving or selling or marketing is innovating. And so if it's not, or not at the pace that that particular, professional wants, you do see attrition, because people will move in this industry at a much faster rate than in other industries. You look around and you'll see insurance brokers, they'll be in their trade for 15, 20, 30 years. Yeah. You'll see, a similar thing, with investment bankers or banking or, any of these other industries where it's really common to stay with a company for the long haul. And in technology, when you look at the average length of time that someone's in seat at a technology company, it's 4 years. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be prepared for that, right? It can't be shocking to us, but that's the flip side, right, of agility. Yes. Is people need to be hungry and challenged and seeing that innovation come to life, or they will find it somewhere else.
Yes. Now, Molly, you stepped into the Chief Executive role earlier this year, bringing your experience as the Chief Customer Officer into that role, which I think is a great segue for your business. Can you just share with us what your thoughts were when you were offered that role, or had the conversation about, would you like to come into the Chief Executive role, Molly? And what did you think about the challenge? You must have had a moment thought, well, we've had probably almost a year of COVID by then and lockdown, and you were observing from a second level position. All of a sudden, you're it. What was on your mind about what you would need to achieve as Chief Executive in this role?
Yeah. The thing that I have been and continued to be very, very passionate about is culture, and how we can create and drive a culture of excellence through our technology and through our teams. And I think this last year showed me how vital and important that is.
Can you be specific?
Regardless of this. Sure. So, as we were talking about earlier, when you allow your culture to rest on an event, an in-office presence, a person, right? Which happens often. You have these very charismatic leaders, and they're the drivers of culture throughout their company. And that's not a bad thing. But what happens when they leave? What happens when the office shuts down? If you don't create an environment where your culture is lived out by every single person who works for you, then you really are kind of setting yourself up to have these peaks and valleys. And so one of the things that's just vital for our team as we head into this year, which is still, fueled with change, we're still not back in our offices full time. We have customers who are still impacted. We have a new workplace or market that's wildly hot. People are changing jobs all of the time. So we have to be intentional as a leadership team, and I have to be intentional as the leader of our team to ensure that we are spreading the culture we desire throughout every single person who works for us, every new hire. And that has to be a balance of, absolutely desiring for people to love where they work, but also for us to be achieving great things and working hard to be innovators and disruptors on behalf of our customers and future customers. Or as I said earlier, those people who come to you because they desire that exciting, agile environment, they will leave. And so we're very focused on creating that culture at Pushpay.
Now, that's a really interesting point. As you stepped into this role, I think that key point about if the culture is symbolized by strong individuals who come into the office every day, clap their hands and go, okay, team, what are we going to do today? That's a really important part of leadership. As you say, it's harder to do if you're not in the office, and much harder to do if you've got 20 people on a screen. Can you tell me what your practical measures have been to adjust and spread the culture so that you can make sure that you've got 405 people all buying into it?
Yes. Yeah. So we have a program of work that we kind of launched at the start of this fiscal year that's all around improving internal communications for the environment we're in today, and being very, very thoughtful about what type of information is shared in which environments, because some things just aren't appropriate for an all company meeting. People are on Zoom calls all day long. And so the last thing somebody wants when they show up to a 30-minute all company meeting is to be bored to death with a run sheet of facts or kind of a not inspiring business update. So we really protect that time. Okay, if we're going to pull every single person off of the floor of our business to focus on this 30-minute thing, we have to be doing several things. Number one, people need to understand where we're going and how their role is influential in us attaining that goal, right? There's nothing worse than working somewhere where you're like, I have no idea how my contribution, my role actually helps us be successful, or boil down, how do I know if we're winning? So that's a point that we always are really focused on sharing. How are we going against our goal? The second one is we want people to feel valued. We want them to feel valued in any interaction they have with us. Even if it's a difficult coaching performance conversation, we care so much about the people who work for us that we are committed to giving them high quality, valuable feedback so that they can grow. And the other piece I will say is, we feel that we need to honor local culture. And so that's a pivot in internal comms for us. Is Auckland has some really amazing local culture that happens in the office that we have there. They do things just a little bit differently than we do, and that's okay. It's not just okay, but we want to encourage it. And so we encourage that local culture to take place, so long as it's a healthy part of our corporate culture, right? We don't ever want to let local culture become, the spiral of them kind of spinning off. And same thing in Colorado Springs and in Redmond. We have unique things that make us who we are. And then the other piece, from an internal communication standpoint, is we've grown really quickly. We were founded in 2011. Here we are this month, actually, we're 10 years old. And in 10 years, we've gone from 0 employees to over 400 employees. In 2019, we added 120 associates through the Church Community Builder acquisition. So as you grow in that way, you have to be even more precise in how you design internal communications. And you almost have to kind of think about it from an over communication standpoint. I need to over communicate to ensure that the messaging that we desire, that I desire as a leader, that it makes its way down to everybody.
Yes. While we're on the topic of culture, I love this conversation. One of the things that I get excited about is the understanding of how the cultures in your value chain, which I call the culture circuit, how they impact on you. So one of the key points about your business, as you said before, we're a technology company, so therefore we attract a certain type of people. They are people who enjoy technology, or they might be people of faith, and they might be people who've got both those sets of skills. So what you're bringing in is people from a tech environment, so that's the technology culture. They pick up their values through the tech training, through their tech institutions, through their previous jobs, which are of other tech businesses. The people of faith bring their culture with them, whether it's a Catholic church or a Presbyterian church or Anglican or some other environment, and of your schools and charities. They've all got their own sets of values. When people come into the business, they all bring those different experiences from their past. And those external cultures impact who you are, who you become. In some industries, those external cultures have a very strong impact on the culture of the organization, particularly, as I mentioned before, insurance companies and banks and government departments that have been around for hundreds of years. They have cultural values that go back that far. So it's quite difficult for them to change their culture today, because the industry is shaping them as the tech industry shapes you. What I'd like to just explore for a minute is your customer base, churches, charities, and schools. Have you noticed a shift in their values, beliefs, and behaviours in the last 18 months? And if you have noticed a shift in their beliefs and their values because of what's happened in their sector, how does that impact you, and how do you respond to that?
I wouldn't say that I've seen a massive shift in their values. I've definitely seen a massive shift in their behaviors, right? Churches and nonprofits relied so heavily on in-person events.
Yes.
And I don't mean events to speak lightly of the church services that are happening on the weekend, but if you think about it, it's an event that happens each week that provides a place and a program and an opportunity for people to connect and experience each other.
Yes.
And suddenly they had...
Sorry, Bonnie. A shift in behaviours does require a shift in values, because values drive the beliefs and the beliefs drive the behaviours. So if you've got a shift in behaviours, which has been forced by COVID, further down the cultural foundational elements of culture, you have to have these shift to match it. If the shift doesn't match, you get a discomfort, you get a sense of something's not going on, not going right here. It's a bit like as in a personal situation. If you've been put into a situation where your personal behaviour has to respond differently to an external situation, you might feel a disconnect between your values and what you've been forced to do behaviourally. So those organisations valued meeting face to face. In order for them to shift their behaviour to digital, they have to start to value that too. Otherwise, they're going to feel a disconnect between their belief system and their behaviour. So I'm just wondering that you either go with it or you don't. And if you don't, you feel a tension, and that tension comes out in a less attractive way. And perhaps they have shifted their values to match that behaviour if you don't see the tension.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, I think for churches, the value-based statements are about desiring to create connection and community. And the how, right, as they did that, how was through in-person services. So you can change your how, right? You can change your how to be digital in that moment, but still absolutely value creating connection between people. So I would say, I saw churches all across the United States and the world, truthfully. We are so blessed. We serve churches all over the world. They had to change their delivery mechanism, but their value of people and creating connection and wanting to make sure people feel like they are seen, heard, and they have a place to go, that didn't change, certainly throughout the pandemic.
Yes, I think you described yourselves having a very strong value around the team and the face-to-face fun activities that you're able to do when you're in the office. That value drives that behaviour, which is, meet and greet and have occasional social events. When you can't do that, you're challenged, your values get challenged. And And your response to that, I think, was the increase of focus on really good communications. And so that's been your response to dealing with that disconnect between we really like being together, but we can't. So our response to that is going to be communication. So you've done that for your own people. But over time, you might notice a shift in the underlying, I'm not saying they will shift their spiritual values, but perhaps their values and beliefs about the way that you meet, the purpose of meeting.
No, I think we're just using the word value like in two different ways. There are things we value, and then there are values, right? So one of our values as a company is that we're people focused. And how that lives out for us is that we value relationships and we choose to put others first. And that can play out in so many different ways. But the value of being people focused doesn't change just our delivery. But I think we're just saying it in two different ways, values versus things you value.
Sure. Molly, with regard to going forward, what is your strategy going to be for setting a future pathway in times of continued uncertainty, when we don't know when the borders will open, we don't know when everyone will be vaccinated, we don't know whether there'll be another strain which will put us all back into lockdown? How do you plan forward? How do you strategize in your sector? What's going to be your approach?
Yes, so I think there are a couple of things that have pivoted for us in a healthy way through this, if I'll be really honest. And one of those is understanding what it feels like to be a remote employee when others are in office spaces. And the reality is our current layout of our business, and likely well into the future, is that we will always have groups of people meeting together in locations, but we'll always have people in different locations that need to somehow connect with us. And so I think we have recognized that and tried to really create a better environment for those remote folks and how they connect. And we have work to do. That we have not figured this all out, but we're definitely working on it. And then the other thing that I would say is, from a business continuity standpoint, is, it really has helped us to be future focused, which is so important for what we do. We have to have a growth mindset and be future focused. So thinking through those situations that you just mentioned, not just from an employee-based standpoint, but from a customer acquisition standpoint, from a growth standpoint, how would we, if we needed to pivot, or how would we dig in more into the products that we have today? How do we inspire our current and future customer base to desire to purchase and use more of the features and solutions that we offer? Is absolutely something that we build into our strategic planning each, I want to say year, but I feel like we're unpacking it constantly.
Exactly. Well, your focus has been on Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Canada, and the USA to date. There are a huge number of churches, charities, and schools right across Europe and Latin America and Asia. What's going to be your approach to expanding your market? I mean, this is all about COVID, but I'm just wondering about, those are great growth opportunities for you. Can you exploit them in a lockdown world of lockdown? Is it too hard maybe to be able to do it if you can't travel there and build those relationships and see those cultures for yourself?
Yeah, I think that we've learned over the last 18 months that we absolutely can expand and grow. And with the incredible innovation that's happened in our space, not just through technology, but just, in media and digital marketing, we have access to markets digitally that we probably in the past would have had to travel to and build rapport and build relationship. And I'll say, I don't take the value out of that. I still think there's so much value in face-to-face communications and building those really rich, deep relationships with people that you desire to partner with in the future. But I do think that we have the ability now, and our world has been lightly conditioned to expect more digital presence, right? Like, it's not uncomfortable for you and I to have this interview over a virtual meeting tool, as opposed to, us sitting side by side and having this conversation. And so I think that, we really have kind of pivoted the way that our world expects and can deliver services. But again, I would just say, I'm a firm believer, I might be a little bit old school, but that there's so much value in those face-to-face interactions, shaking hands and building rapport.
Yes, definitely. I think your point about, we have been forced through this last 18 months to get comfortable with digital communications. And for those who didn't have an MS Teams or a Google or a Zoom, downloaded on their computer, they all do now. And
yes.
As I was saying to someone the other day, the idea that you had to be present to add value has completely gone, because we're all adding value. Businesses are continuing, and relationships are building across the world. So it's got to be a really good thing. However, we haven't yet experienced or fully understand, because we haven't had time, because we're not out of lockdown in a lot of places, to understand the ultimate impact of that. I wonder what you would say to other chief executives and people who are your customers and people who might be listening today. What would be the key lessons that have come out of this?
I think, one of the key lessons for us is to just highly value customer feedback, to highly value the people who are showing up for you every single day and ensuring that they know that they're valued in their workplace. And the other thing I would just say is, in times of crisis, and that's the hard reality, is that we have all just walked through an international pandemic, something that hasn't happened in over 100 years. And it's okay in those moments to ask for help and advice and be able to rally around your community. So for me, that's having conferences and calls with other executives and leaders of businesses, and just, checking in on one another. And I think, I know this isn't kind of where your question was going, but one of the things that I will forever be grateful for about this last year is being able to watch our leaders absolutely with 100% pure intention show up for their team in really hard situations. People have just traveled through really hard seasons, and for them to really just step up and say, this might not be HR appropriate, but I'm going to check in on that person. I'm worried for them. And so I think, my fourth, if I can have a fourth, is just be a human first. Sometimes you just have to be human first, and that's okay, even in business.
I think most people were pushed to that point about being human first because they felt it emotionally.
Yes.
It wasn't an intellectual, cerebral problem. The first thing was, oh my gosh, I've got all these people to look after. Your first answer was listen to your customers. Can you share with me why you said that? What came out of your feedback from customers that makes you say that?
Yeah, it was just incredible that our customers gave us such valuable feedback about how they were pivoting in this time. We use the term a lot. What is your felt need? So when I'm thinking about a customer, what is the need that they're feeling in the moment that they need us to resolve? Yeah. And if you fully can understand that from a tech perspective, a support perspective, a sales perspective, or a marketing perspective, you can have an appropriate answer for that. And I think oftentimes we want to say, we know what you need. And maybe we need to pause and listen and say, what do you need? And how can we build or deliver a solution that's going to solve for that need?
Okay. And so when they gave you this feedback, what was required of you? Was it a change in the technology? Was it a change in your service level? Was it a change in communication?
We definitely changed our communications. We definitely leaned into our service levels. We had many smaller customers in that moment who needed to get up and running fast. They literally went from planning a weekend service on a Thursday to Friday having to cancel the service. Yeah. And so we had to increase the speed in which we were able to get somebody on board, resolve an issue, have them up and running for the weekend. So we took what would have likely been a multi-week process and had to condense it somehow into hours. And so we leveraged technology to do that. And we did kind of a self-paced learning module so that people could, if that pastor or that executive team needed to stay up all night to learn about how to do it, we weren't the roadblock, right? We decided, hey, we're not going to be the roadblock in this because of our business hours. Yeah. We're going to create the content so they can consume it and they can get their church up and running as quickly as they need to.
Molly, this has been a fascinating conversation because I don't often get to talk about, what churches need. I'm a bit of a lapsed Catholic, but I do go from time to time, and quite often I get, the basket comes along the row, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, have I got change in my pocket?
Exactly,
so,
I know.
It's always an embarrassing moment. Anyhow, it's been wonderful learning about your business, and I think Pushpay has done the right thing by, I beg your pardon, by bringing in promoting someone from your stream of work, which is the focus on customers, into this role, because it's a really important part of what you're offering in terms of your service line. So thanks so much for sharing that with us.
Yes, thank you.
Before you run away, though, I have that very last quite important question to ask you, which is that if you find yourself promoted to CEO of the world sometime in the future,
a big job.
It would be a very big job. So I'm just giving you this opportunity to anticipate what your priorities might be. What would you focus on? What do you think the world needs? What should the chief executive of the world make priority for attending to in the first 100 days or so?
Yes, I'm going to go with something that's quite high level and not tactical, but I genuinely believe that our world needs to focus far more on what we have in common than what divides us. And so that would absolutely be the thematic, strategic goal of my CEO tenure, is just, helping people to understand and see the commonalities as opposed to focusing so heavily on the differences.
And what would that be in the world? The most common, the things that are common to all?
Well, I think, at the core, we're all human.
Yeah.
At the core, we're sisters, mothers, wives, partners, daughters, sons. I think so often we want to allow religion or race or all of these things they're real and they're true, politics, goodness, to really define us, as opposed to being okay having a difference of opinion and respecting that difference of opinion. But at the end of the day, understanding that more of who we are as people is the same than it is different.
Sure. Great answer. Thank you so much. You would make a great chief executive of the world, Molly.
Thank you.
Look forward to that.
I'll probably just stick with my day job for now.
For now. Thanks so much for sharing
thank you.
A little bit about your business, which I think people will find fascinating, and the insights as to how you and your team managed to get through the worst and get to today, and wish you all the best in the future. Molly Matthews, Chief Executive Officer of Pushpay. Thank you, Molly.
Thank you so much.